Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Propulsion Swimming Podcast. I'm your host Scott, and with me as always is my good friend Dan. And on this week's show we are touching upon the amazing swimming work that's going on at University of Edinburgh with Mat Trodden, as well as touching upon the LEN Under 23s that have just happened last weekend.
Yeah, we've got ourselves a great coach for this week's episode. Matt has done great work up in Edinburgh of late and looks set to be continuing that. He's back from being on poolside, like Scott was saying, from the LEN Under 23s that happened in Dublin last weekend. So I'm very interested to get his thoughts on that meet, as it's the first time it's ever happened, as well as get to know the Edinburgh Set Up there in Scotland.
So let's have a quick listen for what's to come on this week's episode.
Every journey is different with every single athlete. No two are the same. So I think that's the beauty of coaching, is that you never get on the same bus or you'll work with it. There might be things that are similar, but for each person it's going to be something that's going to make them tick. And it's once you find that out, I think you can go on an awesome journey. I've got a real genuine passion in that link from what we do in the gym into the water, how we train it, and how we get the best return on our money in terms of making yourself strong is one thing, but how do you apply it in a medium where water's going to move about? Just it's never fixed. Use it for visualisation, where we train the sounds of the race pace. So we record the athletes at race pace, and we allow them to visualise and sort of hear and try and recreate senses in and around what their actual race feels like. It's very easy to sit and do meditation or imagery, but it works differently for every person.
So for those who don't know much about Mat Trodden, he is the deputy head coach at the University of Edinburgh and has been there since 2014. He specialises in strength and conditioning and also has a degree in sports science and psychology. Now, the programme up in Edinburgh has produced some fantastic swimmers over recent years, specifically the likes of Kara Hanlon, Archie Goodburn and Stephen Clegg. And we can't wait to talk to Matt all about it. So Dan, let's jump straight into this week's episode. Matt, thank you for joining us this week. How are things with you after a busy weekend over in Ireland?
Yeah, it's been a very long season. I think that was week 53, so a very long year indeed. So yeah, I'm looking forward to some downtime, and it was a great end in Ireland, plus World Paras and all the meets that had gone before this summer.
So Matt, it's no secret to our regular listeners of this podcast that we think pretty highly of the work that's going on over at University of Edinburgh. So give us an insight into the setup in Scotland's capital city and where you come into the team.
Yeah, well, I mean, Scotland's capital city is a pretty beautiful place to be based. I arrived in Edinburgh in 2002 and I've still yet to leave. So, it's got a hook on you. But in terms of the programme, we're quite a young programme. The programme was actually set up by Chris Jones in 2008. There was a pre-existing programme in Edinburgh, City of Edinburgh, which came to its natural end, and Chris set up the university. So he did a whole load of stuff with the university. They had no performance sport at the university at the time, and swimming was the first performance sport set up. So it's pretty cool now. We've got, I think, 11 or 13 performance sports at the university, with all full-time coaches. So it's been huge in terms of the setup. In terms of our development as a swim team, it's kind of been astronomical when you think, we started with nothing in 2008 and where we are today. So, I came into the programme personally in 2014, just after the Commonwealth Games. And since then, I've been coaching every day at Edinburgh. So, yeah, I guess in terms of our day-to-day setup, we have 3 groups in Edinburgh. The Performance Red, Performance Blue and Performance White. Performance Red's coached by myself and Ross Douglas. Performance Blue's coached by Chris. And Performance White's coached by, I think, this could be breaking news. I don't know if I'm allowed to break it, but hey-ho. A guy, Danny Kirkham, who's just joined our team from East Lothian. So, that's great. In terms of how the squad and the structure setup works, is my group has about 18 athletes in it. Some of the names that you'll have spoke to before in the podcast. Chris has about 24 in his, and Danny has about the same in terms of 24. So, that's in terms of we cater for a lot of students. They're not all based at Edinburgh University. The majority are, but Edinburgh's pretty lucky and fortunate. We have 4 universities within Edinburgh, and we also have a couple of full-time swimmers at, obviously, Stephen Clegg and Kara now, who just swim.
So if we talk about you personally, from our research, you've got a very clear background in strength and conditioning. How important is it to have that knowledge when producing top-level athletes in swimming?
Yeah, well, I mean, my interest in strength and conditioning came from when I swam personally. I always knew I was never going to be a world-class swimmer. I was quite fortunate. I got to hang around some of the best at the time in terms of Ian Edmund, Gregor Tate, Chris Gilchrist, Kirsty Balfour. But I always knew my place was going to be in coaching or somewhere in the sport, and I could never really figure out where S&C sat within swimming. At the time. So when I finished swimming myself, I went back and did a master's in strength and conditioning. I've got a real, genuine passion in that link from what we do in the gym into the water, how we train it, and how we get the best return on our money in terms of making yourself strong is one thing, but how do you apply it in a medium where water's going to move about? It's never fixed. So that's where a lot of my interest comes from. I think it sets up a lot of what I do in terms of my philosophy, and that's a big interest of mine.
Yeah, it feels like you chose that path just at the right time, because swimming has changed like dramatically over the past 4 years. Around that time, like when Adam Peaty really burst onto the scene, you saw the work that strength and conditioning can now do for these athletes in the pool.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible in terms of where swimming's gone in such a short space of time. For a long time, especially in breaststroke, you mentioned, no one could even imagine the landscape of breaststroke and how it looks today in terms of what Adam's done for the sport, in terms of what others have done for this sport as well. But it does play a huge part, and I think it's going to evolve more and more. I've got a big interesting contrast, and we do a lot of stuff on whether it's the destro buckets or whether it's with propellers and stuff. And now when I look this summer and see some of the stuff at sort of Cat McAvoy and people like that are doing, I think, that's going to be the next evolution in terms of where swimming's going, I think.
Yeah, because that was
his video of him with, what was it, like 80 kilograms in a bucket, and he's just swimming up a length. That was just nuts.
It's an incredible video, isn't it? I was going to kind of delve into strength and conditioning a little bit, because I think we have a few younger listeners who probably think strength and conditioning is just getting in a gym and lifting as much weight as possible and building mass, like Adam Peaty, let's say, for example. But how does strength and conditioning differ when it comes to different strokes and distances? It's obviously going to be different.
Yeah, well, I guess you've got your long axis strokes like free and back crawling, and your shorter axis strokes in terms of breast and fly. And I think there's an awful lot to be said. You can get very, very strong very, very quickly. Everyone knows that we can do that in the sport, but there has to be a balance between the strength that you put on and how you apply it in the pool. And quite often, I think where people get into a little bit of hot water, so to speak, is when they put on too much strength too quickly and expect results in the pool. It takes a long time to train that and also to get your full feel. And I got that from a very young age. When I trained with Frederick New in like 2004, 2005, we were on a camp in Canny, and this is where I started thinking about it. And at the time, Fred's married to Elena Popjanka, who was a sort of Belarusian swimmer, and Oleg Lizagor at the time was there with his coach, and she could obviously converse in language. And I was sitting at the table and I said, go and ask how much he lifts. And she sort of asked the question, and the coach said he didn't lift. He was already too strong. And that really made me think an awful lot about what we do in swimming and how we apply it. And I think a lot about COVID. We had a great season coming off the back of the COVID year, which you maybe think that was 20 weeks. It felt like 20 years. 20 weeks out of the water. But, we did a lot of basic body conditioning and training, and I think you saw that anecdotally. I don't know what other people were doing, But I think swimming came back in a slightly better place with people that had gone back to basics, or however you might want to call it. But we trained our core. We'd almost built the access at the base that we could then put the work on in the gym. And I think that's where we look very heavily at the start of the season on that sort of stuff. I think at UKSCA and that sort of, they start their S&C courses saying you can't fire a cannon off a canoe. You need a stable base. And in swimming, the only thing we need to be able to do is fire a cannon off a canoe. So we have to learn how to control our body in water. And we never swim through the same water twice. So I think that's a huge part. It's important to link many different things into the pool, and how you transfer what you do in the gym into the pool's, I think, pretty key.
So when you say you learned so much during the COVID times from those 20 weeks out, and you've now learned how to build a better foundation at the start of the season, how is that affecting results at the end of the season? Is it a case that you guys can then get into your winter block a lot quicker on in the year? Are you just building a stronger foundation, stronger athletes? How's that translating to summer results that have just gone?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, again, there's two areas, isn't there? There's the results that are here and what we're thinking about in the future. So there's some things that we're doing currently, or we've done currently with a few athletes, to set ourselves up for next year. Whether that's a huge strength block to get to where we need to, or where we think we might need to be. So we've now got 6 months, 7 months to train that, or whether we're looking at a different approach. Generally, our first 9 weeks, and it will be the same this year, are all focused around core movement, getting everything that we've done in our profile and in screening nailed. So we want to be able to create the right patterns on land that we then use in the water, whether that's underwater, whether that's off the start. And then we've got a 12-week strength block. And then after that, we'll look at the finishing touches in a further 9 weeks into sort of trials, I guess.
God, I feel like we could deep dive into strength and conditioning for the entire podcast, but we've got so many questions to ask you. Another thing from our research is that you've got a degree in your sports science and psychology. How important is it to train the mind as well as the body nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge part, isn't it? I think my big philosophy is, we have to have fun in what we're doing. We have to enjoy what we're doing, whether that's coaching on a day-to-day basis or as an athlete in the program. And, a lot of what I'd hope my athletes would say is around supporting them, build them as people. And I think that's the key thing. I think too often in swimming, we either get bogged down in finding out sets, reps, what other people do. I don't think that makes a huge amount of difference. We're all within an area, whereas I think where swimming and coaching needs to go is the development of relationships between athlete and coach. How you go on a journey together, what does that journey look like, and how do you support and learn? There's things that we've done with athletes over a 5 or 6 year period to provide and make sure that they get to exactly where they need to be. And it can't be done in a month, a week, or a year. It's got to be a long-term approach. And I think possibly one of the biggest things hinders us, but is a challenge in coaching now is we're an instant world. You can find out about anything in a couple of clicks on the internet. You can't train to be a world-class swimmer instantly. That's going to take time, and for different people, it's going to take different amounts of time and different amounts of application. So for me, that's a really big piece and it's where I'm always trying to sort of develop as a coach. I work with a great coach developer, and all the stuff that we do is around interaction and how we get the best out of athletes.
I'm kind of having flashbacks to our podcast. It was a very long time ago now with John Rudd, and how he was speaking that actually he was a teacher for many years before he was a swim coach, and it was all about delivery and how he got kids to engage with the sport. So that's kind of what I'm picking up with your sports science and psychology degree, is that you're actually helping. It's less about how you're actually helping the swimming, but more about how you're helping yourself as a coach, like interact with the swimmers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the biggest thing, and the biggest part is it's a very quickly changing world. I think that probably how the world's changed in the last 5 years has been some of the biggest shifts in psychology in probably the last 15 or 20 years that went before that. And it's about learning, how do people respond now? What do they want? I'm a big believer in. I've read a book last summer which was Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus. It's a great book. It's how to build resilience, I guess, in a modern day world. And so many of the things that I quite often think about, it was just so elegantly put. I could never put it like that in a book. But how he develops or how he suggests that toughness, resilience, whatever word you want to do, performance ultimately in this modern day world, that's kind of summed up to me. And again, that's just the journey you go on. But every journey is different with every single athlete. No two are the same. So I think that's the beauty of coaching is that you never get on the same bus or work with it. There might be things that are similar, but for each person, it's going to be something that's going to make them tick. And it's once you find that out, I think you can go on an awesome journey. And some of the names that you've highlighted there already in the podcast, Adam Peaty, whoever it might be, the relationship him and Mel, or whoever it might be, that's what's taken them to those places, in my opinion.
So do you take specific sessions to train the mind? I don't know, like a meditation type thing, a yoga type thing with your squad?
Yeah, we've done a lot of yoga in the past. This last couple of years, I've changed that to breathing. We do an awful lot of breath work. We also do some stuff. I work with a great psychologist or mental skills coach. I think Matilda's official title, but she does stuff where we use it for visualization, where we train the sounds of the race pace. So we record the athletes at race pace, and we allow them to visualize and sort of hear and try and recreate senses in and around what their actual race feels like. It's very easy to sit and do meditation or imagery, but it works differently for every person. And we did that this year, and especially for Stephen Clegg, he found that really, really helpful. Working on some of the stuff in and around, and it just adds a new dimension. I sit and listen to it, and it's when you listen to breaststroke, it's almost like a heartbeat, dum dum. So I find it quite interesting to listen to, and then listen to different people and see how that changes in terms of what the sound sounds like, which is I find really fascinating. But it's all just experimenting. You got to try different things, and what will work for one person will be nonsense to the next. But for every person, there will be something that sits.
Would you put a heart rate on them then? Like when you're doing that session, you put a heart rate monitor on them at all?
No, we don't have a heart rate monitor. We just have we use a GoPro actually just to pick up the sound. So it's all about what the sounds of the water sounds like. So it's got to be a pretty quiet pool. They do it one at a time, and it just creates the sound. So it's the same sounds that when Kara gets into streamline, what you'll hear in a race is what we can then provide, and we've started to use that just as a tool, just to make us aware of what we're doing at race speeds and just a different element.
That's a fascinating way to visualize. Like we've literally just had a podcast with Lauren Cox, and she said before every race she closes her eyes and just imagines a turn. Whereas now your swimmers are going almost one step further, and they can listen to a turn. Like they can listen to what a good swim feels like, and it's almost like a different way of training the subconscious mind, like what a good swim is or what swim feels like. I wonder how many coaches will actually take away from this podcast and actually give that a go. Like train their swimmers to listen to what a good swim feels like, or a correct race pace maybe.
Well, that's why I was asking about the heart rate stuff. Like if they're listening to those sounds and their heart rate comes,
you can't hear your own heart rate, can you?
But no. As in the sound of someone doing breaststroke, for example, like the heart rate sound of it. Will that increase the rate of their hearts just because they're putting themselves in a race situation?
I have no idea. Maybe that's
right, okay.
Maybe that's something for my next evolution of crazy Mat Trodden thoughts. Definitely, I think it's something that you've got to explore. You've got to do different things. And I found it quite funny when we actually did a lot of that stuff. We were up at Sierra Nevada. So we were coming in and we're filming one at a time, and then Andy Manley was there with his group, and he was obviously coming in and doing a lot of volume. I thought, it's the first time I've been a wee bit embarrassed. My guys are doing this thing and we're getting out filming, and then they're getting in and actually doing real swimming. So, it's something that we're looking at, and hopefully it can be something that provides an element of difference and helps some of our guys into next year.
Yeah, with both of these elements of coaching that we've just been through with you, the strength and conditioning and now the psychology and visualization, it almost sounds like you're very willing to innovate as a coach. You're always looking to push the boundaries. Why is that important to your coaching philosophy?
I think that probably is my coaching philosophy. It's to break the rules or push the rules, and that doesn't mean... I think when you say things like that, people think, "Oh, that means less," or that means something. But it's just looking at different ways to do it. I think we have to evolve as a sport. The demands on us have changed. It's not the same as the 80s or the 90s. There's different demands on pool time. There's different demands on lifestyle now. I think we have to evolve and not constantly look at the same thing. And again, I don't think I guess it's my information, but when I was working with my coach developer, one of the things he very quickly said is, you'll either have a problem with authority or following rules, and that's kind of what you guys have just picked up on there. And I just want to again explore. Some things aren't going to work, and that's okay. But you don't learn by doing the same thing all the time. And I think that's where I'm looking at in terms of the journey I go on with athletes. I've been very fortunate with a lot of the athletes I've worked with to work with them for 4, 5, 6 years. So there's been a lot of trial and error to find out what makes people tick. But then once we find, I call it sweet spot. And that's in a range of things. It's volume, it's intensity, it's the things that work for them both in, out the pool and the gym. Once we hit that, generally they sort of take off or find their groove.
I love it. Now, one swimmer who you've already mentioned several times on this podcast and is certainly a standout swimmer at Edinburgh is Kara Hanlon. Now, we've had her on this podcast, and for anyone who hasn't listened to her backstory, just go have a listen. It's a fascinating one. Now, she didn't quite have the summer that everyone, especially us here, know that she's capable of, but just how far do you think she can go as a swimmer, especially with Paris on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, Kara's had a pretty crazy year. Again, she broke 68 for the first time, sort of last year in the lead up to the Commonwealth Games. And I think this year has swam, I think went into the season with a PB of 67.3 and has swam 13 times long course, 14 times long course, 30 of them under 68, and I think 4 times under 67, which when we set at the start of the year, the goal was to go 66. We pretty eclipsed that in terms of going 66.3 and very, very close to the
British record.
The British record in Glasgow. I have big goals for Kara. Kara has big goals for Kara. I definitely think we can take that British record in the near future, hopefully. It depends what other people have plans in Britain as well, I guess. But we're definitely looking at 65 now as a realistic target. I think probably one of the things, can't quite remember, I think maybe 34.91 was what she came back when she went to 66.3. And when you look at the final at the World Championships, there was only 2 girls under 35. So, we have a lot. We've changed an awful lot. We've got a huge response. I think there was a lot of learning done in the summer as well, which is going to stand her in a huge good stead going forward, because that really was our first real international exposure at age 26. This summer, in terms of, she had the Commonwealth Games and the Europeans last year, which were great, but that was the first time where you've been to the ball where everyone is. There wasn't anyone missing at it. And there's a lot of learning to be done in terms of eastward travel, in terms of preparing away from the coach. And I think it's going to stand there in great stead for next year.
Yeah, she did say on an Instagram post that she was very grateful for the experience and actually learnt a lot. But what were the main things that you took away from her swims?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit to be done in terms of one of the things that with Kara, it's always going to be something that an area we're developing is her start and her turn, and part of that's just due to the genetic makeup. Her strength and her back end is unbelievable, but she's always going to be a little bit smaller than most of the other girls in that race. So we have to find ways to be better, and it's through a biomechanics model in terms of what's the best possible start we can do. We've been very, very consistent in that this year. So that's a key area for us. The other key area we use an awful lot is altitude, and probably the biggest thing for me I'm going to work out going forward is why were we so fast each time we came out of altitude. So we'd just come down the mountain when she first went 66 at Bucks in February, and then when we just come out of the altitude 10, because it was pretty much the only place we were able to fit it in the cycle. We did want to put it in a little bit later, but just through the calendar, travelling to Set Collie, then not that long into the holding camp, was we could only put it in there, and she absolutely obliterated our best time in Glasgow. So there's a little bit for us to do with my physiologist Mike McKenna, just to work out why were we so good then, and what do we change, knowing that into the year next year. But we've been using that now for 4 or 5 years as a training plan.
I think I've predicted going into, I think it's the last 2 meets that we've done previews for. So we previewed British Champs and then we previewed Worlds. And the last 2, I said Kara's going to get the British record. So hopefully the next one, she proves me right.
Just don't predict it.
I'll tell you what, I'll leave it off for you and see what happens.
It's your fault you're jinxing it. That's the problem.
That's it. Yeah. Okay, blame on me. That's fine.
I'm only kidding. But I think there's still a lot of room for improvement with Kara, and it's great. We've worked together now since 2018. So again, kind of what I was saying to you in that last question, the further we go into the relationship, the more it evolves and changes. We had a great debrief after the Worlds there, and again, it's no longer just a coach telling an athlete what to do. It's a real shared experience. Shared in terms that she does 90% of the work and I stand on poolside, but it does feel like it's not just. I explain it to my athletes all the time. I've got a dog. I've got a wee border terrier, some of them have walked my dog for me before. It's the most infuriating dog. If it doesn't want to walk, it just lies down, and everyone laughs. And I see all these other dog owners, getting dragged to the park by their dog, and that's kind of what I say to my athletes. And Kara is the sort of epitomisation of that. I have to run to keep up with her, and that's a great place to be. We're pretty excited about next year. Hopefully there's going to be some good things.
You've got a big cohort of breaststrokers in the squad. It's not just Kara. Is that like by design that the squad makeup is like that, or that they're all doing so well?
Again, it's a funny one because people will always ask that, and Edinburgh's had a pretty rich tradition with breaststroke. But the only thing that you can get is what comes through your door. Quite often, one of the things that we'll get told is Edinburgh's a bit of a sprint program, which isn't true. We've got loads of people from loads of different areas, but you can only have what comes through your door. We are really grateful. We've got a couple of great breaststrokers. We've got Kara and her training group of Anna Morgan, Katie Goodburn. There's Archie Goodburn and Usheen Cook as well in the group, which is it's just a real phenomenal group of breaststrokers to have. Anything from a guy that goes 206 short course in Usheen, who holds the Irish record, and Archie obviously, and then Kara and the girls. It creates a good environment, but no two of them train the same, because if I train Anna like Kara won't swim very well. Anna won't swim very, so That's what I love about breaststroke, because it's a puzzler, isn't it? Everyone moves slightly differently through the water, and you've got to understand how people move and how people sit to get the best out of them all.
Yeah, and it's not just breaststroke. You've got the backstroke, of course, Scott Gibson, who ended the year extremely well, 50 backstroke, Scottish record, sorry. First of all, how much of a confidence boost was that for him going into the summer break? And secondly, even with the depth of UK men's sprint backstroke scene suddenly, is he going to be challenging for the elusive medley relay spot come trials?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's every Brat Caller's dream in this country, isn't it? To try and get that medley relay spot. I don't think Scott would mind me saying it was probably one of the toughest seasons that he's had. Especially leading up to trials, it didn't quite go in terms of how he wanted. He struggled with a few things, but post trials, some of the work that he'd done and in terms of what we tried to develop was astronomical. We'd done an awful lot of work, some real great work with our physios in and around how he sits underwater and what we're doing underwater. And I think that was probably the big difference maker in terms of his 50 back at the time. But he went obviously 24s, I think 8 in the individual, but then that 24.5 leading off the relay was lightning quick. And it's quite a cool place to be. We have to make him slower, don't we? Next year, he can travel at that speed. We just got to get him to swim slower for longer. So it's really exciting with him, and he's another great athlete. Again, I think I've been working with him since 2018. So the development now is really taken off. We've done an awful lot in the background just to find out what works best. How do we get the best out of Scott? And again, he was chomping at the bit to have a meeting with me to discuss about next year. What do we change? Do we need to change anything? And our big goal was to be as fast as we could a year out. I don't think we quite thought we were going to be at 24.5. We'd said, I think I'd said to Ian Wright at the time, I think he could go 24.7 at the meet. So, now it's a case of try to make that speed really easy and see what we can do at the back end. But I think that's the big thing for me is the quicker you are, the more capacity in some aspects you have. You can go out if he goes out 25.3 or 25. Whatever he might want to choose, whatever we might think he wants to go out next year. That's 0.8 over your best time. If your best time is 24.9 or 25.1 or 25.2, then that's right on the limit of what you can handle. So he's done a great job, and we're really excited with him in terms of he graduated this year as well. So there was a lot of pressure on finishing that. So he's got a great opportunity next year in terms of a free training year to really attack it.
It's like the exact same conversation we had 1 week ago with Lauren. Literally,
yep.
Just how she translated her 50 over to the 100. Now, before we touch upon Archie and LEN Under 23s, which was a meet that you attended, I just want to touch upon Stephen Clegg and World Paras. Now, he's probably not going to get the recognition he deserves. Like, for some reason in this country, paraswimming just doesn't quite kick on unless it's the Paralympics. But how important is it to have a swimmer of that caliber and like as successful as he is as part of that program? Does he bring everyone else up, even the able-bodied swimmers?
Yeah, I mean, Clegg is amazing. I guess, I don't know whether you guys will know or not, but I actually coached Stephen's older brother, James, at a Paralympic bronze in 2012. And I learned so much from James. He really transformed sort of my race modelling, how we do it. In terms that we had to find a solution. How do we know where we are in the water? And I think at the time, his rate was something like 48 and 17 strokes, and this is James Clegg in 2012. And we knew if he went out, he'd be in around about 27.8 to 28.2, and then he could. After that, he can make a decision based on how he's feeling, because he doesn't have the same awareness as what other swimmers might have as to what's happening in the race. He has to be really aware of what he does in the race. And he was an amazing athlete in terms of that. His brother is about 3 or 4 times better. Stephen is just incredible in terms of his awareness of how he sits in the water, his discipline to what he does, and he's he's the only athlete I've got in the whole program that, never really messes a breakout in training. And I think it's just he is different. Again, he will all utilize, and I guess maybe for the listeners that aren't aware, is that Stephen has a visual impairment. So he uses his other senses way better than anyone I've ever coached in my life. So I think he's aware of the pressure changes in water, and how he breaks out, and how he gets the stroke count right every single length. And he's got some lofty goals. He'd really love to try and win the 3 Paralympic gold medals next year. And we've done an awful lot of work on different strokes this year off fly, which is, I guess, his main one, to ensure that we're going to be in a position to be able to challenge for all 3. I think probably the biggest thing for Stephen is the length of the season next year. Everyone's keen to get back in at it because it's Olympic year or Paralympic year, but you've got to remember that for Stephen, it's going to be the end of August before he gets his opportunity to compete on the world stage. So, that's probably the biggest piece of work we're doing this now, is over the length of Stephen's season. But he's brilliant, and he trains alongside Kira Schlosson and Tom Carswell, who are also both great flyers, and it really makes me happy sometimes, especially with Kira and Clegg, the way they discuss how they move in the water, how they feel in the water, different sensations is great, because that's kind of where I want to go. I don't want a value to be able to put on everything, because a value is only as good as whatever the value says in the paper. How a person feels in the water, how they can relate to it, and how they can describe it to you is the most important part, because how I feel in the water is going to be different to how either of you two feel in the water. But for me, it'll be massively out of shape. But even in terms of stroke even in terms of stroke technique and stuff, no one's going to feel the water the same. So we do an awful lot of work in and around that feel. How do you feel? What works for you? And we all have certain drills and different skulls that are key for each individual based on how they feel the water.
Yeah, I was going to talk about sculling and Stephen Clegg and his increase in sensor feeling the water. So I imagine he'd be, if there was a sculling race, would he then win that race just because he knows the feel of the water and the pressures and stuff like that?
I don't know. We're pretty keen on sculling. It's probably the most competitive race we'd have in Edinburgh. But I think Danielle Brayson, who's one of the Glasgow coaches, she was at trials. She came in and she said, I knew instantly, it was one of the 3 sessions, that there was 10 Edinburgh University students in there because they were all sculling. And I took that as a massive kudos. But we do an awful lot of sculling in every session, and we have a couple of drills that are specifically as to how you feel in the water. So as we go through a week, we'll do them. And they're basic things. We call it LVD. It's just basically a flat out scull. How far can you travel through the water and then recover your arms? And most of those guys will do the 50 metres in 4 or 5, which when you start to break that down, you're travelling 12.5 metres. Obviously there's a push off, but you're travelling 10 or 12 metres each one. So we do that for a couple of reasons. Reason number 1 is to see where we're at. Reason number 2 at the end of the week is to tell if we're actually fatigued. Is it neural, or is it actually we're not holding the water anymore? Exactly where are we? If you can do the same number but you just feel tired, that's maybe not so much of a problem. But if that is going to start creeping up, then we know how you're feeling the water or how you're holding the water has changed.
I'll tell you what, Dan, if we want to go film some sculling videos for the channel, I think we know where to go. I'm fine with a weekend in Edinburgh.
Yeah, I don't mind that either.
So let's touch upon racing last weekend then. In the inaugural LEN Under 23s, you were one of the coaches who was selected to go out to Dublin. Tell us a little bit about the meet, or what you learnt about the meet as it went on.
Yeah, so I didn't. Well, I guess no one really knew very much about the meet because it was the first time it had ever been done. But I think it's a meet that world swimming maybe has been crying out for. Really lucky LEN have stuck it in, especially I guess how they've maybe changed other elements of European juniors, world juniors, stuff like that. as I think it'll be a really important meet going forward. Obviously, we only knew what everyone else knew. There was a couple of nations that were invited prior to it, so I think you guys actually put a tweet out on day one saying, "Can anyone explain why some finals are 9 and some
I had
finals are
no
10?"
idea.
Yeah.
But it was. I did wonder that myself before we went. How does it work? But it was great because the Americans and I think the South Africans were there. South Africa and Zimbabwe. They really added value. And the fact that it didn't take anything away from the European athletes, and the fact it was an 8-lane final if it was just Europeans, or 2 foreign athletes were allowed to compete in it. But again, before I went, I kind of thought a 3-day meet, that's going to be a little bit tight. But I think the format of it actually worked fantastic. I think if it had been a week earlier, that would maybe be the icing on the cake. And I don't know how much the home nation had in scheduling, but I felt immensely sorry for Davy, Leah Schlosson and Lily Booker, because it seemed that breaststroke was up every night. First event for them. Also happened to be the ones that Mona was taking them home. So I guess as a host nation, you're allowed a little bit, but maybe going forward there could be a little bit of scheduling change. But that's the only thing I would really look at changing. I thought the 4x1 freestyle and the 4x1 medley could switch, because that was really hard on the 2 freestyle girls and the 2 freestyle boys that ended up doing 4 swims and 100 freestyles in a day. So yeah, in terms of the meet, I thought it was brilliant, and we had a great meet. I think Britain had 13 medals overall, 5 gold, 4 silver, 4 bronze, and we're just inches away from that elusive 6th gold, which would have, I guess, taken the top team title in whatever format you want to do it. If you're American, I guess we got the most. If you're Australian, Ireland won the most golds. Don't want to get into that debate, but it was a great meet. And as I say, I thought it was. I guess probably when they selected the team, they selected it with sort of cautious optimism in terms of not really knowing how the rest of the nations would go, but I think Alan set out on day one, with the tagline of fearless racing, and I think a lot of the athletes did that. There were some excellent medals that maybe we were expecting, maybe we weren't expecting. It came through, so it was a real good meet, and it was a great group. And as I say, the setup, Ireland did a great job of hosting. In terms of the transport, in terms of the prep areas, it was really well done.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously an inaugural event. It was the first time it's ever happened. Do you reckon this meet will continue next year, and will it help development of certain swimmers, or all the swimmers actually?
Yeah, I don't know. I probably should have asked them that before I came on this. I think maybe it could be a bi-yearly thing.
Okay.
Maybe every second year. I don't know. I'm not involved, but I think that would probably work. Because I guess you got Olympics and stuff next year. But I could see it running something like that. I know on the pool deck, all the coaches that were there were raving about it in terms of I spoke to anyway, in terms of opportunity, in terms of how it was kind of needed. I think John had a presentation that I think was done through LEN, obviously, on the second day, and that was kind of a key point in the guy's presentation, was how important it might be in terms of bridging that gap from junior swimming into senior swimming. And I thought it was highly competitive. Again, you didn't really know what we were going to expect, because there was no sort of entry list or team list. It was put out till sort of 48 hours before the meet started. So it was only then that we had a real good grasp on how competitive the meet would be. And some of the times that were swam there were incredibly quick. In terms of Whiffin's 1500, was it? And the German girls and the distance, and then the German lad in the distance was incredible. And a lot of the sprint races obviously were pretty hotly contested too.
How does it work with you being a selected coach for British swimming on a team like that, where some swimmers are your own and others aren't? Do you stick with your swimmers? Do you mix and match? How does it work in terms of the coaching setup?
Yeah, I guess every team I've been part of has been different, but it was, I guess, headed by Alan Lynn this time. So I think there was maybe five groups in terms of split up. So I was really fortunate to work with a great wee group of swimmers, of which Archie was part of, and I think probably on a short meet like that, it makes sense in terms of athletes that or know of. Brad had a lot of the Stirling athletes. It just makes sense to get the best out of people, I think. And then working with the coaches that are left at home, to try and deliver the best possible performance for their athletes. I think it works really well. But in terms of the team, everyone's digging in and working together, because you'll be going from poolside up to the stands to watch a swim, and other people will be pairing and or swimming down. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of what happens on these teams, in terms of coaches just picking up maybe stuff in the swim down or priming or whatever. So probably I hope the athletes really enjoyed it, but from a personal level, I thought it was a really great coaching staff to work with, and I thought it was a good environment to be in.
How do coaches get the chance to be selected for meets like this? Is there some sort of criteria that you've got to hit?
Again, I don't know what British Swimming's selection criteria was. I was just very glad and honoured that I was given an opportunity to be a part of it this time. But I think Alan did a presentation at the British Swimming Championships, where he, as head of development, he wanted to offer as much opportunity as there was, and I think there was an awful lot of coaches that got an awful lot of really, really valuable opportunities, whether it be European Juniors, the Commonwealth Youth Games that happened a couple of weeks ago, and then obviously this under-23s with obviously the senior team getting World. So I don't know how they go about it and look at it, but I think it was great that so many British coaches were able to get exposed to as many experiences this year as possible.
Yeah, meets absolutely everywhere. Like, for a channel who tries its best to cover as much as possible, like, we were stretched beyond our limits. I couldn't even cover them all. If we kind of end the LEN Under 23s talk if we touch upon Archie Goodburn, your swimmer, what does he specifically take away from this event in his development as a swimmer?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of his development as a swimmer, we did a completely different cycle this block to set us up for next year. So there's quite a lot he took away from it. There was he managed to get his hand on the wall, get himself a bronze medal, and I think it's third fastest of his career in terms of the 50 breast. The other two coming at trials, and just that experience of international racing, especially in the breaststroke. Breaststroke's an incredibly difficult stroke, because you're aware more maybe than other strokes, especially in and around. So being able to race in that environment and be able to be in that environment, especially when things get hard and there's people on either side of you, because that's when things happen and you end up snatching. So that's very hard to replicate domestically, because it's very rare that you get 3 or 4 of Britain's top breaststrokers all at the same meet, all in the same state of preparation, to be able to go like that. Maybe Edinburgh's really the only opportunity in the domestic calendar of pre-trials that people get that. So for us it was important to go there and race the 50, and then see exactly where we were, and look at some of our race plans. How did we execute them, and what things do we know what we've done this block to be better next year. We've done a huge strength cycle with Archie. He's a very strong boy, but we're not going to be able to utilise that, and hopefully for another 6 months.
Oh, Matt, well, there's so many lessons I hope everyone's taken away from this podcast. Coaches, swimmers, fans alike. Now, we do usually finish, though, with some quick fire questions, and we have a coaches edition. So, what's your favourite stroke to coach?
Breaststroke.
Who's your swimming idol?
My swimming idol? My swimming idol in terms of a swimmer is Kitajima. I guess in terms of coaching, I was fortunate enough to work with him for a while, but Shannon Rawlston, someone I greatly respect.
Nice. What's your proudest moment in the sport of swimming so far?
See, I got asked this a while ago and I messed it up. Well, I didn't mess it up. I told the truth. And I've had some amazing things. My first athlete, Mark Tully, it was at the Commonwealth Games, or putting Lucy on the Olympics in 2021, or what Kara and the rest of the guys are doing currently. But I think my proudest moment, and this is honestly speaking, is when I started in East Lothian. It's not a quick fire answer here. In 2008, I had a couple of athletes swam in the programme. One's Bruce Halloran, the other's Danny Kirkham, who are now both in coaching, and Bruce is the head coach of Warrender. So that's my proudest thing, because I hope what he developed through his time with me is he's going to influence swimming for a long time to come. So I think that's my proudest moment.
I love that
Good answer.
That's great.
Yeah, I like it.
What's the hardest set you've ever given out?
The hardest set I've ever given out. 350s, one on 5 minutes, where we just get the lactate spiked, and then 250s back to back with 5 seconds rest. I think Tom Carswell in particular would tell you he didn't enjoy that.
And final question, it gets to know you a little bit away from a swimming pool. If you've gone on a road trip, there's 3 spaces in the car. You can take friends, family, celebrity, anyone you want, dead or alive. Who would you take with you?
Honestly, I just take my wife, my child, Charlie, and my dog. So that's the three most important people to me. So that's who I take.
I love it. Matt, nice. Thank you so much for coming on to this week's episode of the Propulsion Swimming Podcast. We are definitely going to be up in Edinburgh again very soon, and hopefully we'll catch you on a poolside. Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say to you guys, thanks very much for what you're doing. It's really good for the sport of swimming, and it's where I get most of my swimming news. So keep it up and keep working hard. Otherwise, I'll not know what's going on. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very kind. Yeah, thank you for coming on. And honestly, I think we could have had you on for another hour to talk about strength and conditioning and the psychology, Edinburgh. We'll have to get you on again, I think, because there's so much more we can delve into. So thank you for coming on, and best luck leading into the next important year going into Paris. Yeah. Dan, a podcast that could have gone much longer than the 50 minutes record time. Matt is a fantastic wealth of knowledge within the sport of swimming, talking about psychology, talking about strength and conditioning, but so many other lessons to learn in terms of innovating as a coach while respecting the traditional boundaries as well. Just a brilliant podcast all round, I think. Well, yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And there were so many different routes we could have gone down. I mean, the main topic was supposed to be the LEN Under 23s, but I felt like we could have gone down so many different ways, like strength and conditioning. I had loads of questions lined up in my head, but we had to move on. Psychology, loads of questions, but we had to move on. So we'd have to get him back on again. And the visualization, that was insane. I really want to find out more about that. And he actually said when we were signing off that we can go up to Edinburgh and do a bit of sculling, and maybe we get a bit of footage of that, because that would be incredible. Yeah, I mean, literally, last week's podcast, we spoke to Lauren about visualizing. We put a clip up of it. It's done really well. 40,000 people have seen it. Now, this is a different level of visualization that, honestly, I'd never thought of. There might be coaches who are listening and just oh, yeah, we've done that before. We've listened back to races. But hopefully there are some swimmers out there who maybe just struggle to visualize, because a lot of people actually can't imagine images in their own mind. And the technique that Matt talked about, strapping a GoPro to the back of a swimmer and recording the sounds, might be a really useful way to train a swimmer into visualizing a race plan, especially breaststroke in terms of stroke rate, in terms of tempo. It actually blew me away. I'd never thought of it. Why have I never thought about that? I'm literally the film guy for this channel. Well, this is where I wanted to ask so many questions. Does that only work for breaststroke? Because it is a very up and down sort of stroke, as with butterfly. But would it be as effective for something like backstroke and front crawl when the GoPro might be but you still hear things, don't you? I suppose you do. Again, these are the questions I have to ask, and we'd have to go up there and find out. But fascinating. I love the fact that he isn't just your traditional coach, let's say. It's just, meters, turns, dives. Yep. No, he's all about doing things differently outside of the pool with strength and conditioning and this visualization. Incredible. This is probably the reason why Edinburgh, his squad anyway, are doing really, really well right now. Well, the whole of Edinburgh squad, really. The swimmers that are coming out of there, like Kara,
everyone knows how highly we think of Kara Hanlon on this podcast. Archie Goodburn certainly has a chance in the 100 breaststroke next year to be challenging the likes of Adam and James.
Yeah.
And then you think of Stephen Clegg, who's very much sort of an unsung hero of the para swimming scene in this country. He's, hopefully he wins that triple gold coming into the Paralympics next year. But Dan, as you said, this was meant to be a little bit of a catch-up of the LEN Under 21. So let's have a quick touch upon the performances out there from the British squad. I believe about 18 swimmers went. And we came away with 13 medals, 5 golds, just behind Ireland 6. And for me, there were some very clear standout swimmers, and ones that have actually built some momentum going into Paris and the Olympic trials next year that potentially they probably wouldn't have had this meet not been on, which is why I see it as so valuable in that transition from junior to senior. And for me, I'm going to start with Jono Adams, going a 53.4 in the 100 back lead off in the medley, and then a 25.1 in the 50 back, is really challenging the likes of his teammate Cam Brooker and actually getting close towards what Ollie Morgan did this summer. He won't get the headlines written about him, but a 53.4 is good.
Well, it's nigh on the same time, isn't it? You're in your low 53 region then, and now we've got, what's that? That's now 3, 4, maybe even 5 boys that are now hitting that sort of time. It's a matter of time before we have a 52-point 100 backstroker, which is exactly what we need for these medley relays. So that's very exciting. And I loved his interviews of Nick Hope as well. I don't know if you've watched them yet, but he is very bubbly. We'll have to get him on a podcast at some point. Kiana McInnes swam very well in her fly races. 2 golds for her. The times were not quite what she did at trials, but either way, it's quite close to her season's best.
She's had a long summer.
She has, yeah. And
she was actually at Worlds.
She's taken away a lot this year, and actually, like you say, I think there's a lot of momentum from this year going into Paris, so I think she's one to watch out for. And then obviously you have the Irish swimmers as well, Dan Whiffen, who Matt was alluding to, and then Mona McSharry in the breaststroke. They swam, those 2 swimmers especially, they swam extremely well. But I think there was a lot of swimmers. Ed Mildred also swam really well as well.
Archie Goodburn, we mentioned Charlie Brown.
Yeah, there was a few.
I think this meet has a place in the swimming calendar. I don't know where it fits next year. Probably doesn't with the Olympics on, but I think it's got a home. I just hope it continues in countries we can get to.
Biannually sounds good to me. I think
in Ireland. Let's keep
every
it
year. Yeah, let's keep it there. Yeah, I don't mind that.
Okay, so that just about rounds up this week's episode of the Propulsion Swimming Podcast. We're going to be back in 7 days' time with a big guest from the world of swimming, a massive one. So make sure you're subscribed to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify so you don't miss out on that. And me and Dan will see you next week.
Yeah, thank you for listening, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next one.
You've been listening to the Propulsion Swimming Podcast with Scott and Dan. We want to thank you for joining us and invite you to subscribe to the show, as well as checking out the Propulsion Swimming YouTube channel for weekly tutorials and videos to get your swimming fix. We will be back next week. Until then, we'll catch you on the next one.